continue our dive into the Deluge, starting with the Subtractive Synths oscillators. So we've got an init patch here. By default, it starts here off with a square wave, but I'm going to move that up. So we'll check out sine wave. Let's see here. So as expected, right, simple sine wave. It is nice that they included it, though a lot of the subtractive synths don't, just because there isn't any harmonic content to carve out, but it's nice to be able to have something to build like a simple organ off of. So, and this is a nice clean sine. Right, then we've got triangle, which, as expected, cuts through a little bit more. Could build a little bit richer organ off of that, or use that to create some nice clean overtones as like another layer on top of the other oscillator. We've got square, which again is the default. It's where we started. It's very nice, very punchy. Again, very clean, as you'd expect from a modeled synth. What's interesting is they have sort of these analog. So for both the square and the saw, they have the standard version, and then they have what they call the analog version. So for the square, you definitely get a little bit more harmonic content. You get a little bit of buzz that isn't there in the other one. Which is kind of nice. Okay, then looking at saw, we've got pretty standard saw. So one thing that's interesting with kind of all of these is they definitely seem to, not emphasize, but lean into the sort of medium to higher frequency harmonics. At least to my ear. It doesn't show anything unusual on if I switch this over to the oscilloscope, but or to the spectrum analyzer. But there's definitely, even with the filter totally open, there's definitely not a huge amount of harmonic content there, which isn't a bad thing. And they've got lots of tools that we'll get into in other videos to really beef that up. So it was just interesting characteristic of the oscillator models. So then we go into the saw, or the analog saw. So what's interesting is the analog saw actually sounds a little bit cleaner. Well, maybe not that time. And looking at the spectrum analyzer, not seeing like a big jump in these lower harmonics, but it does feel like there's a little bit more there. At least to my ear. What's also interesting is, and I suspect this is just a function of the timing of different notes being played and the oscillators just being on different at different points in their duty cycle, but it creates some nice variation. Where it doesn't sound like it's just the exact same, like a digital sample being played over and over again. It's actually a really nice, even on just the regular, so not the analog. And that really only comes through when you've got multiple notes being played, or multiple voices, I guess. But it gives some nice texture to it. Where I mean, it's almost like a round robin kind of effect, where it's going. You know, if this were a sample synth, it sounds sort of like a round robin effect. But I suspect it's just, again, the timing of when the second note gets played in comparison to the first one, and how the duty cycles on those two voices are lining up. But anyways, it's a nice effect, and again, gives some nice variety. So that's it for the waveforms. So the wavetable and sample synths are also built into the Subtractive Synth, but those are pretty big topics, so I'm going to leave those for another video. I do want to take a look at, though, some of the other elements of the oscillators. So first, we do have two oscillators here. Second oscillator has exactly the same waveform options, so we can bring the second one up. And if we wanted to, again, do like an organ type effect, so very simple organ. Again, it's only two oscillators, but still a nice organy kind of sound. The triangle is kind of nice. So if you want to switch your decimal places, just use the horizontal navigation. The triangle waveform has a lot of leeway before you can really push the detune before it starts sounding out of tune compared to some of the other waveforms. And of course you get that nice sort of pulsing effect. But stacking the triangle waveforms is really nice. I'm going to switch to the square. And again, we'll just... With the square, we get a really metallic-y kind of sound. Looking at the saws, got some nice potential for some decent super saws, especially if we bring in, so let me bring that detune back, we can bring in unison, and we can go for an even richer super saw. With by increasing the number of oscillators or the number of, I guess, oscillators per voice, yeah. Up to 8. So it's interesting, the detune for the unison setting, or the unison voices, is not the same, I guess, units as transposition. So it's just like a ratio for each of that splits up all the voices depending on how many you've picked for unison. But that's not a bad supersaw production. So and then you can beef that, and there's lots of other, distortion and other things to beef that up even more that we'll dig into later. So the last part I want to look at for this video is pulse width. Actually, let me pull that down, and we're going to turn down our second oscillator, and we're going to start with square because it's pulse width. Which works mostly as you expect. One thing to note is it's not bipolar, so it won't decrease the uptime of the up phase of the duty cycle. Which isn't an enormous issue, but it does mean you can't have an LFO sort of vacillate around that 50-50 point. Which is a little bit unfortunate, but is sort of just a minor limitation to be aware of. What is interesting, though, is pulse width applies to the other waveforms as well, which I did not expect. So actually I'm going to go to sine just because it's the easiest to see the effect on the scope here. But so what looks and sounds like is happening is that there's essentially just, it's the same or similar effect to a hard sync, but with perhaps a little bit finer control, because there is actually an oscillator sync function as well, where we can detune oscillator 2 and then force oscillator 1 to sync to it. But that will push, let me switch to that actually. Let's bring oscillator 2 back up, and then oscillator sync enabled, and we'll play with the transposition here. Oh, and actually, let me switch that to a sine. So the oscillator sync works as you'd expect it to. You could hear the different harmonics getting emphasized as we move through. So what's called pulse width on the non-square, on the non-pulse waveforms, is basically doing the same thing. It just doesn't have the same range. So a little bit, I don't know, finer control, I guess. But you can set up either of them, I think, for modulation. So either way, but it was just an interesting, I guess, tidbit for pulse width. But that pretty much takes us through the bulk of the oscillators. There's some interesting stuff going on with the polyphony settings and the other voice settings, but I'm going to save that for when I talk about envelopes because it's a little bit more closely tied into that. So I think that's where we'll leave it for today. Till next time.